The villains of Knights of the Old Republic 2 are some of the more interesting Sith Lords in my opinion. Aside from being some of the most successful in their campaigns against the Jedi, as characters each of Darth Nihilus, Sion, and Traya represents something bigger or more important to the messages of the game than the more generic Sith of the Week, which sometimes show up in Star Wars. Kreia and Nihilus have pretty explicit backstories within the game. Kreia, aka Darth Traya, had been a former Jedi, and Nihilus had his roots in the Mandalorian Wars as well, having been a Jedi or possibly just a normal soldier who fell victim to the mass shadow generator superweapon used to end the war at Malachor V, turning him into a being of pure hunger. If the Force were Big Macs, Nihilus is the Hamburglar. While each of these characters does have their own mysteries and unanswered questions behind them, we at least get some clear outlines to who they were and how they came about. Darth Sion, on the other hand, seems to be the least interesting on the surface, but if you dig beneath that craggy outer husk, he's the character who we really know the least about. By the time you meet Darth Sion in Knights of the Old Republic 2, he's a being held together by pure rage and pain. He and Nihilus had originally teamed up with Darth Traya following the end of the Mandalorian Wars and the Jedi Civil War against Revan and Malak, and he'd begun assisting her in hunting down the Jedi. Sion and Nihilus quickly turned on her though, stripping Kreia of the Force and turning the Triumvirate into a more classic and comfortable Duumvirate leading the Sith. But the bigger question for us today is, how did Sion get to that point? Issue 34 of the Knights of the Old Republic comic have one potential origin point for Sion, which out of context looks like a pretty reasonable one. In this comic, which is set during the Mandalorian Wars, a dark Jedi named Hazin was trying to put together a dark side and light side combination army, hoping to fulfill a prophecy he had manipulated called the Prophecy of the Five. This prophecy said, quote, "One for the darkness, one for the light, one from the darkness stands in the light, while one from the light stands in the darkness. The last one stands apart from all." Hazin saw himself as the fifth one of that combination and was trying to put together the other four. He himself looks like he could have been an earlier version of Sion as well, which helps highlight a potential connection between him and Sion even more. He told another Jedi, Lucian Dre, that he saw Dre as the future dark side leader within this prophecy, saying that Dre could be known as Darth Lucian or Darth Sion. While this seems like a crumb to set up some connection between Dre, or at least Hazin and Sion, in the notes by writer John Jackson Miller for the following issue, he says, quote, "You always want to let your characters find their own fates, and Lucian here tells us what he thinks about being forced into a role created for someone else. The galaxy may get its Darth Sion, but not from him. So in short, I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time with this last minute or so of the video." I do kind of wonder if John Jackson Miller had been setting this up as a potential thread for anyone working with Sion in the future to pull on, or if it was something he had been setting up but then was told that he wasn't allowed to do that. But ultimately it went nowhere, so in short, I'm sorry for wasting everyone's time with this last minute or so of the video. In reality, Sion was already running around while Hazin was trying to make his armies. The clearest information on Sion's true origins come from the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide, which I also referenced pretty heavily in yesterday's video about Bastila. When you're looking for lore, RPG campaign guides are pretty amazing. Chronologically speaking, the first solid bit of information we have on Sion comes from the Great Sith Wars of 3996 BBY, or years before the Battle of Yavin, which is roughly 40 years before the events of Knights of the Old Republic. During the Great Sith War, he followed the reigning Sith Lords Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma, fallen Jedi who had been given the leadership of the Sith by the long-dead Marka Ragnos, another Sith Lord who I covered pretty recently on the channel. Sion had always been wallowing in anger and pain, and the campaign guide places heavy emphasis on just how special and mundane that pain and suffering is at the same time. To others it would seem mundane, but like with all pain to the person actually experiencing it, it can seem all-encompassing, which it was in this case to Sion. During the Great Sith War, Sion threw himself at as many Jedi opponents as he could, fighting on the front lines and looking for every opportunity to finally be killed and end the pain. His reckless fighting meant he had plenty of opportunities to get nice and injured, increasing his pain tolerance and slowly convincing him that he was actually immortal. When he was finally beaten in a battle and essentially killed in a fight, he decided he wasn't super interested in being dead, and focused all of his anger at finally having been killed on simply staying alive. Well, it seems like this would have meant before the Great Sith War that he was a normal man, and therefore probably only a few decades old. The guide also mentioned how he'd been dominated by hatred since time immemorial, which to me implies he'd potentially been intended to be far older than that. In practice, I don't think that's the case though, otherwise there would have been something else keeping him young or alive for much longer before all the pain stuff, which is really what makes him special. So I personally don't think he was born much more than 30, maybe 40 years before the Great Sith War. And this is really where he separates most from Kreia and Nihilus, where we know roughly when they came about and the broad strokes of their entire story. But with Sion, apart from being mostly set up in this campaign guide, there's also the possibility of a much longer period before then where he'd been an active Sith, even if my personal read is that he probably wasn't. Whatever his specific birth year was, Sion would basically spend the next several decades concentrating all of his self-reinforcing pain and rage on keeping his flesh together, which was scarred at best and decomposing at worst. We don't know what Sion was doing during the Mandalorian Wars, but considering the Mandalorians were allies of Exar Kun in the Great Sith War, which they called the Shadow Crusade, and that Sion had held a deep-seated hatred for the Jedi, it's not impossible that Sion would have been involved in the war on their side, but he also may have just been in Sith space ignoring the conflict. When Revan and Malak took control of the Sith, Sion did actively join their forces, fighting in the Jedi Civil War against the Jedi. He of course managed to survive that war as well, along with the standard Sith infighting which followed, bringing us full circle to his teaming up with Kreia and Nihilus in the events of KOTOR 2. That's going to do it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As we get into more shows for the rest of the year that are going to be airing, I'm going to try to have more videos each week as well, including the upcoming battle animation that I've been mentioning, so I hope you're looking forward to that. Either way, consider subscribing for more or leaving a like. Maybe even share the video somewhere if you really enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.